All right, we are on lesson 9, which is officially unit 2, which will cover rhythm, and lesson 1. But for the sake of simplicity and keeping things more streamlined, on the actual channel, when you're trying to figure out which lesson to do next, we're going to call it lesson 9. We're still going to be in the ABC stage for part of this unit because there's a few more things we need to define and be able to identify before we can actually decode. But by the end of this unit, we'll be well into decoding. The lesson we're going to cover today is going to introduce and start to cover the topic of rests. The note values we learned are going to be used to represent pitches or sounds on our sheet of music, and the rests are going to be used to represent silences. Let's get started.
All right, so remember we have a staff consisting of 5 lines and 4 spaces that we count from the bottom to the top. We can write a whole note on space 1. We'd want to center that note, and it's just an open note head. We could write a half note on line 3, and we'd want to center it right over the line, and the stem would go down and on the left side. If we wanted to draw a quarter note on space 4, it would look like that, filling up the space nicely with a filled in note head, because the note value is only worth 1/4 of a whole note. And the stem would also go on the left side and down, and then we could put an 8th note in space 2. The stem would go on the right side, and the flag would hang down. The stem would go up. All right, we also learned about clefs, which will go on the leftmost side of the staff, and they'll help us know which pitches to play. So we talked about a treble clef used for the higher voices, the right hand of the piano, and the higher instruments. We start that treble or G clef on line 2, up and around, bump 3, bump line 1, and just like that. This is called the G clef because all of this curly Q action highlights line 2. If we put a note there, it's called G. From there, we can figure out all the other pitches on that staff. Again, this is called a treble or a G clef. We also have the bass clef, or F clef, which is used for the left hand of the piano, lower instruments, and lower voices. And we start that on line 4, bump up to line 5, down and around half a heart. Stopping around line 2, we put a dot in space 4 and another one centered in space 3. These dots highlight the special line 4 on the staff. If we put a note there, it would be called an F. And from there, we can figure all the other pitches on that staff. Again, that is called a bass clef or an F. All right, we're going to move on to our lesson for today, and we're going to start by just reading through this lesson on rests. Music is more than just one note or musical sound after another. Sometimes there is silence in the music. The musical symbol for silence is called a rest. For every type of note, whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, etc., there is a rest equivalent. So we'll just look at this. We have a whole note, which is just the open oval note head, right? And then we have a whole rest. And notice the whole rest hangs from line 4, right? So it hangs from line 4. You could think of it as being heavy. So it's like a little hat that needs to hang, okay? It's going to tip over, fall over. Then we have the half note, which is worth just half the value of a whole note, and its equivalent, silence. So that would be a half rest. Notice how similar this looks to a whole rest. One way of telling them apart is that a half rest is worth less, right? We could think of it as being lighter, so it's a hat that will sit on line 3 instead of hanging from line 4. This is a quarter note here, and that would be a played sound or pitch, right? And this is going to be a quarter rest, so a silence. This is a pitch or note or sound. this is a silence, okay? Equivalent number of beats for both of them. All right, and then we have eighth note. So here's your eighth note, right? Which would be worth just an eighth of the value of a whole note, be held for an eighth of the duration as a whole note. Now you have its equivalent eighth rest, okay? And that would be, again, this is a pitch or a sound, whereas this is going to be a silence. All right, so we are going to draw our rest value pyramid now next to our note value pyramid and just be able to kind of review both at the same time. So I'm just going to write rest here, and we can remember that a whole rest is going to be the same duration as a whole note. The question is just whether we're playing a pitch or a sound or silence. In this case, we're going to play a silence, and this will be called a whole rest. Notice how it's heavy, hangs down. It'll be a hat hanging from line 4. Then we have half rest, which we get if we split a whole rest into 2 equal parts. This looks like a lighter hat that sits on line 3. We can break these down into what looks kind of like a Z with a tail. These are going to be called, oopsies, sorry. These are going to be called quarter rests, and they are worth just 1/4 of the duration of a whole rest. We can take these quarter rests and break them into 2 equal parts. These will look sort of like a fancy 7. So we draw a little dot and a swoopy kind of 7. And we'll learn how to draw all these in future lessons. But for now, I just want to give you an idea. These are called eighth rests, and they are worth an eighth of the duration or an eighth of the value as a whole rest. And then we have 16th rests, and I'm not going to draw all these, but they look a lot like 8th rests, except just like with the notes, they have 2 of these kind of swoopy bits, okay, instead of just 1. So I'm just going to draw 4 of them, right? But we would need 16 of them because 1/16th rest is worth the duration, or would be held for the duration of 1/16th of a whole rest. So just as we've talked about with our note value pyramid, we cannot at this point assign any specific beats or duration to these note or rest values. The only thing we can say for certain is that they have a fixed relative value. So just like we talked about with note values, for rests, for silence values, a whole rest will be held for twice as long as a half rest, and a half rest will be held for twice as long as a quarter rest. A quarter rest will be held for twice as long as an eighth rest. An eighth rest will be held for twice as long or worth twice as much as a 16th rest. All right, so we're just going to look back now at our lesson and go through their music math equivalents here. 1 whole rest would be equal to 2 half rests, equal to 4 quarter rests, equal to 8 eighth rests. Bit of a tongue twister, okay? Starting with 1 half rest, equal to 2 quarter rests, which would be equal to 4 eighth rests, okay? And really, we're just doing fractions here, right? Half is equal to a quarter plus a quarter, which is equal to an eighth plus an eighth plus an eighth. Hopefully I don't run out of room here. Plus an eighth, right? We can literally turn them into fractions if that in any way is helpful to you. 1 quarter rest would be equal to 2 eighth rests. All right, and just as the author J. Althouse, he gave us this kind of ruler version of understanding the note value durations, he does the same with the rest value durations. So notice the upside down hat, the whole rest, is going to be worth the most, right? Call it, I don't know, 8 inches, right? And then we're going to notice the half rests are next. The hat that's now upright, because it's not worth as much, it's worth half the value as a whole rest, be held for half the duration of a whole rest, okay? Call that 4 inches. And then maybe we have 2 inches for the next level, which would be the quarter rest. It would take 4 of them, right, to be the equivalent of a whole rest. And then we have the 8th rest. It would be, each of those would be held for 1/8 the duration of a whole rest. And again, reinforcing the idea, you notice there are no beat assignments as of yet because we just don't know. We just do not have that additional decoding information yet. We just know that there is a fixed relative value of these notes. All right, so finishing up with the last page here of this lesson, circle all the whole rests on this staff. So remember, we are looking for heavy hats that are hanging from line 4. So this is a quarter rest, 8th rest, 8th rest. Oh, heavy hat hanging from line 4. This is one of them, right? Then we have quarter rest. Oh, it's a hat, but this one is sitting on line 3. So that is not a whole rest. This is actually a half rest. We have an 8th rest. Oh, another heavy hat hanging from line 4. So this would be another whole rest. Here's our lighter hat sitting on line 3. So that's just the half rest. And here's another whole rest hanging from line 4. So we have 3 of them. Circle all the half rests on this staff. So we're looking for the lighter ones that are sitting on line 3. Here's one, right? We have that lighter hat sitting there. This is an 8th rest. This is a heavy hat. So we have this is a whole rest. We don't want to circle that guy. Quarter rest. Here we go again, a lighter rest that's sitting on line 3. So that'll be our half rest. Here's a whole rest hanging from line 4. Quarter rest, 8th rest, 8th rest, and another whole rest because it is hanging from line 4. Circle all the quarter rests on this staff. So we have an 8th rest, that's swoopy 7. We have a half rest sitting on line 3. Here we go, a Z with a tail sort of. Then we have a whole rest, 8th rest, quarter rest, 8th rest, half rest sitting on line 3, it's lighter, quarter rest, and here's another whole rest that's hanging from line 4. Circle all the 8th rests on this staff. Well, over here we have our whole rest again. We have our half rest sitting on line 3. Here's our 8th rest, that swoopy looking 7. Then we have our quarter rest, the Z with a tail. Then we have another 8th rest. Then we have a half rest again sitting up on line 3. We have another quarter rest. Now we have another 8th rest, the swoopy 7. We have a whole rest hanging from line 4, nice and heavy. It's our longest rest value, longest rest duration. And then we have another quarter rest, I should say, sorry. Okay, and last bit of our page here. Write T if the music math is true. Write F if the music math is false. So we have a whole rest as equivalent to 2 half rests. Yes, that's true, right? Definitely. Okay, then we have an 8th rest is equivalent to 2 quarter rests. Definitely not, right? You need 4 8th rests to equal that. All right, so number 3, a half rest, notice it's lighter, it's sitting on line 3, is equivalent to 2 quarter rests. Well, yes, it would be, right? So true. And then a quarter rest is equal to 4 8th rests. Well, let's see here. 2 of them together would be equivalent to 1 quarter rest, right? So no, that's not true. False. This would be a half rest sitting upright, nice and light on line 3. Is that equivalent to 4 8th rests? So let's see here. Each of these would be equivalent to a quarter rest, right? And 2 of these together would equal a half rest. So yes, indeed, it is correct. And then we have a whole rest, which is a heavy hat hanging from line 4. Is that equivalent to 4 quarter rests? Well, quarters, right? Each of them is worth a quarter of the duration of a whole rest. So yes, that would also be true.